DEVON LARRATT versus LEVAN Saginishvili. On this channel, I've covered a lot of different aspects of the build-up to this match from both a LEVAN and a DEVON victory perspective. I've tried to remain at least somewhat unbiased, sorta. But in this video, I'm going to give an official in-depth prediction of exactly how I think this match will go. I'm going to cover all the possible outcomes of this match that I could see happening, all the crucial technical aspects of the match, and of course, most importantly, who's going to win. So let's get right into it. To start off, I think it is important to say that I completely understand most of the perspectives one could have on this match because of all the unknowns going into this. Is LEVAN still injured? Is DEVON going to get injured? Is LEVAN at his peak? Has he surpassed his peak? Is DEVON really that much stronger than last time, etc.? The thing about this match is that it really is very difficult to know these things for certain, so I think that every possible outcome has a pretty high likelihood. Okay, getting into the technical flow of the match, I think there are 5 super important aspects of this fight. DEVON is going to have to win all 5 of these, whereas LEVAN probably only needs to win 1. These 5 are the battle of fighting for height, then the battle of DEVON's elbow flexion and pronation versus LEVAN's wrist flexion, then the battle of climbing and adjusting if the match is stopped, then DEVON's ability to prevent a flop press versus LEVAN's ability to get to a flop press, and finally, DEVON's ability to transition to an offensive move versus LEVAN's ability to prevent this. And I think this should represent the flow of the match in order. So let's break these down. Firstly, both guys are fighting for height. This is going to be a combination of arm length, radial deviation, of elbow flexion, and of the setup. DEVON will be trying to get a super deep grip, and he's going to be trying to make his webbing way higher than LEVAN's. Of course, LEVAN will be trying to prevent this from happening, but I do think that DEVON will at least get a slightly better setup than LEVAN does. DEVON has also been able to hugely increase the strength of his radial deviation. Now, I think that their arm lengths may actually be similar, even though DEVON is taller, based off of what some people have said, so I'm not totally sure about this one. And as far as elbow flexion, LEVAN is clearly superior. Overall, I think that DEVON's ability to rise will lose to LEVAN's, but DEVON's ability to cheat in the setup will make up for this enough so that DEVON can force LEVAN to hold on to him to a certain extent. So I think that DEVON will win this aspect of the match just enough to stay alive. Not win it fully, but just enough. Next comes the battle of LEVAN's wrist versus DEVON's entire top roll chain and potentially his king's move. Now this is an aspect of the match that is so difficult to know about, but to be totally honest, based off of everything we've seen, I do not think that LEVAN's wrist is 100%. I think it's probably around 10% off of where it was the last time these guys faced. And I also think that DEVON's ability to top roll is significantly stronger than it was last time. Combining this with the fact that DEVON did just barely crack LEVAN's wrist back the last time they pulled, I think that this time LEVAN's wrist is going to get cracked back eventually, provided that DEVON does not get injured before round 4. But by no means is this match over if everything I said up until this point happens. In fact, the true war has only just begun. DEVON is going to have to sustain a combination of LEVAN hitting with side pressure, and he's going to need to prevent LEVAN's ability to climb and adjust. It is entirely possible that LEVAN can still just drive sideways and downward even with his wrist cracked back and pin Todd Hutchings style. It is also possible that LEVAN will be able to regroup and rock back onto his elbow and rise up and over the top of DEVON, and then from this position regain the ability to bend his wrist and get the pin in this way. And another very real possibility is that LEVAN will be able to transition to a flop press. We have seen LEVAN pressing in the past, so there isn't anything that would tell us he can't do the same thing now. Hermes was able to block LEVAN's press, but Hermes did this by committing his own shoulder. DEVON is not going to be able to do this initially. He will most likely be barely stopping LEVAN in a king's move if he does get a stop at all. But here's the important factor. While we have seen LEVAN press in the past, we haven't really seen him flop press. Or at least we haven't seen him willing to give his wrist away in order to flop press. So if LEVAN is able to press DEVON while keeping his wrist flexion, I think he will do this. But if transitioning to a press will mean that LEVAN must allow his wrist to go back, I don't think he will do this. There was one moment in the Hermes versus LEVAN match where LEVAN did start pressing for just a second, but as he started to press, his wrist began to go back. Now LEVAN could have simply allowed his wrist to flop back and fully committed to the flop press. This very well may have been the correct technical decision. but he doesn't do this. He immediately defaults back to his top roll so that he can get his wrist back. And this is me just really taking a wild guess at this point, but my best guess is that LEVAN will not decide to press Devon if he must surrender his wrist in the process. Or at least not initially. Eventually, if LEVAN realized that his only option is to flop press, he might do this. But in this case, LEVAN would have had his wrist taken from him and then been forced to flop, as opposed to strategically giving his wrist away in order to isolate Devon's bicep and press him to the pad. So just to be clear, I think that LEVAN is plenty strong enough to flop press through Devon's king's move, but I do not think that he will be willing to do so. I think if we do see LEVAN flop pressing, it will be out of desperation and not as an initial move like we saw from Gennady, for example. Now, assuming that Devon is able to do all of these things in a row, which is a big if, he's still going to have to figure out how to eventually transition to an offensive move of his own. Barely stopping the pin is one thing, but getting all the way back through center table with a whole LEVAN in the way is another thing. Even with his wrist back, LEVAN will still have access to his elbow flexion and his side pressure. Devon will need to slowly climb and adjust to the point that his webbing is so much higher than LEVAN's that they have nearly slipped out of the strap entirely, just like in the Georgi versus Jerry match. He's going to have to be extremely careful while doing this to not provide LEVAN with a window to do a quick surge and get the pin. If he is able to do this successfully from here, I think that Devon will have the ability to stand up, bring his shoulder forward, and then gain full control of the match. And if this process simply repeats in every following round, I think that Devon is going to win this match. But here is where potentially Devon's biggest problem comes into play. If LEVAN is willing to flop press off of the go just like Gennady did, I don't think Devon has an answer. If LEVAN is flopping off the go, Devon will be forced to abandon his open top roll and try to meet LEVAN bone on bone in the center table. And I think that this will be very difficult for Devon. However, once again, while I think that LEVAN is totally capable of winning via this lane, I don't know that he is willing to commit to that lane if he needs to. Say that we end up in a situation where LEVAN is up 3-0 and then Devon finally gets a stop and starts to turn it around. Is LEVAN just going to bleed himself out while trying the exact same move over and over? Or will he decide to commit to a flop press before he runs out of gas? Once again, I am just totally guessing here, but my best guess is that LEVAN is going to end up bleeding himself out for a very long time before he thinks about committing to a different move. I think it's very possible that LEVAN eventually will try to flop press, but by that time he will have gassed himself out for so long that it won't matter. So, my official prediction for the Devon versus LEVAN match is, I think that if Devon does not receive an injury, he will probably win this match. And I'll just say 4-1 to lock in a score for fun. Keep in mind that I am banking on Devon staying healthy and I am banking on LEVAN making multiple technical errors. It is totally possible that neither of these things will be part of the final outcome. I will not be surprised at all if LEVAN wins 6-0. I think that a LEVAN 6-0 prediction makes a ton of sense, but based upon all of the factors mentioned above, I think that a Devon victory is probably just slightly more likely. Now, we've all talked about predictions a ton of times over the last month for this match, so what I'd be interested to hear from you guys in the comments is, do you think that this will be the match where we finally see a LEVAN Saginashvili flop press? And we are now officially less than 1 week out. So excited.